1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 18, 17, 30, 31, 32, 38, 39, 30, 30, 40, 39.
And 100!
Welcome to the 100th episode of Simply Text. While we may have some work to do on our counting to 100 at home, I think my daughter's version actually feels pretty representative of the path that led us to episode 100, which you can read more about with a LinkedIn article that I posted in January of this year to mark the 3-year anniversary of Simply Text. Perhaps it's also a possible approach forward as we all confront a sea of some much-needed change and new normals by taking a few steps back at times and throwing in some out-of-the-box ideas or made-up numbers. I thought we'd use the occasion of our 100th episode to kick off a multi-part reflection on some key issues and challenges that we all face right now. We'll start today by taking a look back and, in my opinion, more importantly, forward and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic in the accounting profession. Then, we'll take up and pause on the very important topic of diversity and inclusion. We'll wrap things up by taking a deep dive on leading with change and innovation by sharing not only the audio, but also video from our first ever live episode of the Simply Text podcast recorded in front of a live audience in Chicago back in February. On the podcast today, we'll hear from Sam Allred, Jeremy Clopton, and Heath Alloway of the Upstream Academy. While the conversations are specific to public accounting, they offer some helpful insights, recommendations, and perspectives for all leaders and organizations on working through and emerging stronger from the COVID-19 pandemic. My path crossed with each of our guests today, either through a previous role, in the case of Jeremy, who was a guest in episode 4 of the podcast, and Heath, who has played a key role in connecting with some of the previous guests like Amy Franco, or as part of the Emerging Leaders Academy in the case of Sam, who is the director and founder of the Upstream Academy, and recognized as a thought leader to more than 500 accounting firms in North America. You can learn more about Sam, Jeremy, and Heath by checking out the show notes of this episode available at bkd.com/simplytext. Let's start a reflection by rewinding back to the beginning of the year with Sam.
When we go back to the beginning of the year, Damien, it is amazing to look at the before and after, where we started and where we are right now. At the beginning of this year, across North America, we're in the midst of unprecedented growth and success, and it wasn't, but it seemed like every week the stock market registered a new all-time high. And as I interacted with so many managing partners, we kind of have a pattern that we followed for years. How we get our pulse for the profession is, rather than listening or reading what other people might say, we just very simply talk to 100 managing partners at a minimum every single year at the beginning of the year. And we just get our pulse that way. And what I heard over and over again, the phrase I heard was, we're having the best year in our firm's history. I heard that from so many firms, and they were poised for an incredible new year that came on the heels of an incredible year last year. So firms were excited about the year. They all faced challenges. Even the best firms in our profession faced some challenges, but they knew what they were. They were ready to tackle them. They had very specific goals and initiatives that they shared with us, because our questions are always the same each year. It's, what are your firm's biggest challenges? And what are your biggest goals or initiatives or opportunities? And that drives anywhere from a 10 to 30-minute or greater discussion with, again, 100 or more managing partners every single year. And they were excited about the year, excited about their opportunities. There was excitement as we entered this year. And then March came, and it changed everything. To an extent, it changed everything. If you don't mind my sharing with you, I'd love to share some of their goals and maybe point out how relevant those goals still are, how valid the initiatives still are, even in the midst of the crisis. And in some cases, how it's become somewhat easier to accomplish the major goals they have that they set at the beginning of the year. Are you okay if I share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually just going to ask what some of those were, so that'd be fantastic. Go ahead.
Rather than maybe go through a huge litany of them, let me just share maybe the top four. If you go through 100 managing partners, and we'll always assume that they represent the profession, at least across North America, large and small firms, whether they're in large cities or rural firms or whatever, we think that you talk to a selection of 100 of them, and we pick a different group each year, that you've got a pretty good mix, and they're representative of the profession as a whole. So when I look at their top four goals or initiatives, let me just go through those, and then again, the backdrop I would just ask is just a consideration: is this still a valid goal? And what happens during a pandemic? Can we still move forward and make progress in this goal? And does it become harder or easier? The first goal that they had connected with the biggest challenge that they had, and 100 out of 100 said their biggest challenge was people. How to recruit them, how to engage them, how to develop and retain enough of the right people. And so their number one initiative was to connect with team members, to be proactive, and over the course of a year, 2020, to improve their people situation. And there were some specifics. I mean, they wanted to connect better with their 3 to 6 year people. That tends to be in our profession when people begin to drop off and leave and move and make other choices and leave the firm or leave the profession. And so they wanted to figure out how to connect better with those that were somewhere between their third year into their career and their sixth year in their career. They wanted to provide growth opportunities for their best and brightest people. They wanted to be intentional about how they really developed those that were, and I'll use this term, they're rock stars and they're superstars. They wanted to figure out what they could do to be very intentional with those people. They wanted to get a little bit away from having it feel like a one-size-fits-all approach to anything. How you move from one position to the next, what kind of training you receive, what your focus should be, your mentorship, whatever it is. They wanted to have it feel more like as one managing partner described it, a paint your own picture. The ability, at least for their best people, to say, here's what I'm really passionate about, here's what I want to do, and create that opportunity for them so they really could feel like they could paint their own picture as they move forward in their career. That was the number one initiative. And what's interesting about that is certainly the concern that they faced in the last few years has been turnover, the demand for their people in the marketplace by clients and others, and how many of their people perhaps they were losing was a concern across the profession. Well, you generally don't lose people in a pandemic. You don't lose people in a crisis. We did it in the financial crisis of 2008, 9, and 10. We weren't losing people as a profession at all. So many firms might look and say, oh, our people issue isn't our biggest issue anymore. I'm saddened if I hear that. I think the wisest and the best firms continue to look at that initiative and say, you know what, we've got some wonderful opportunities to connect with our best team members. We're no longer worried they're going to leave us, at least leave us now. What do we do to connect with them, strengthen our relationship, help them grow? And I'm watching firms do that. I'm excited about that. The second initiative was almost across the board. They wanted to become an advisory firm. And an advisory firm is more of a mindset than it is a process, if you will. It's a mindset. How can I add value? How can I help this client become a better organization, and so on? And I would just simply say that initiative, not that anybody ever wants a crisis, and certainly nobody wants a pandemic, but it couldn't have teed up a better opportunity to become an advisory firm. Nobody needs to wait now for an invitation to be a client's trusted advisor. Clients need it in a tremendous way. And so that initiative for most firms, if not all firms, has moved forward in a significant way. And for the very best firms that still have a plan, a goal, an initiative, and execute it, they're seeing phenomenal results now of their firm becoming an advisory firm in the eyes of their clients. The third initiative was to grow non-compliance services, grow those services outside the audit and tax arena. And I would say with many, many firms I've worked with and connected with in the last 6 weeks, they're making headway in that particular initiative or goal. And the fourth one was they really wanted to improve the success of each and every engagement. And really the initiatives they had in mind were, let's do better planning up front, and on larger engagements, let's use more of a project manager's mentality, and let's create a pricing team and not just feel like everybody ought to be pricing engagements when we've never, ever done any training on how to price anything. Let's get a pricing team where we can really put in front of the client options and allow them to choose what they really want so that we can figure out best how to help them. And I would say that all four of these initiatives that were the main initiatives across the profession before the pandemic, I think in so many ways, every one of these has been teed up to be an incredible growth opportunity in each of these four initiatives that firms set. And we've tried to be vocal in asking leaders, don't set these to the side and go into some kind of a survival mode. This pandemic has queued up an incredible opportunity to make progress in these four initiatives. And so to that extent, we're encouraged by what we see, certainly the best firms doing. We're always encouraged by them anyway, but what we're seeing so many firms do across our profession and making progress in these initiatives.
Speaking of progress amid uncertainty, I kicked off my conversation with Jeremy and Heath by asking them to weigh in as well on what they're seeing and hearing from those they work with, as well as their advice on what to focus on.
Yeah, I'm hearing that firms are still trying to figure out what is going to happen. That they're just as uncertain as anybody, right? You see it all over the place. There's uncertainty everywhere, and the accounting profession is no different. I think the advice that I would have is really to focus on a little bit of the things that we know. We know that companies are still going to need accountants, right? They're still going to have financials. They're still going to have decisions to make. They're still going to need an advisor, someone to help guide them through whatever the situation may be. That hasn't changed. It's maybe changed how we deliver that. It's changed a little bit about where advisors and accountants are delivering their services. But that's something that really hasn't changed. And I think focusing on some of what's consistent can really give firms some comfort. And I know that it's so funny that I spend so much time talking to people about how do you get outside your comfort zone, that right now in the time of uncertainty, I'm actually trying to help people kind of go back to their comfort zone a little bit so they understand and they recognize, you know what, we can handle this. Is it a trying time? Yes, it's a trying time. 2008, 2009 financial crisis was a trying time as well. Our profession came out of that great. This is something that we'll come out of. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that so many firms have been able to adapt to the current situation and have been able to move their firms forward and really grow during this. And that's the other thing from an advice standpoint that I would offer to firms is as you're looking to the future and you're thinking about all this uncertainty that's out there, take a step back for just a second and really reflect on everything that you've been able to accomplish in the last 2 months alone. Because if you think about what so many firms were able to accomplish, they've been able to accomplish things that were on their long-term plan for many of them, and they pulled it off really quickly. Let's take remote working. That's something that I've long been a proponent of, probably because I was on the consulting side of the firm and always traveled and felt like I could be productive anywhere, and I was rarely in the office anyway. But when you think about it, so many firms had remote working on their long-term plan, and they thought, this is something that I don't know that we can pull off. I mean, it was January. I remember talking to firms and them saying, I don't really know that remote working is something that's right for our firm. I don't know that we could actually accomplish that. And then the current time hit and firms pulled it off in 2 to 3 days. I think the longest that I heard from some of the various firms that I've talked with was, somewhere in the time of 2 weeks, but they went 90% remote in 2 weeks. That's remarkable. And I think from an advice standpoint, it's take a moment to reflect on the remarkable accomplishments that you've had in the last 2 months, what you've been able to accomplish that you didn't think you could, and use that as some initiative, some motivation, some fuel to move forward and just continue to grow the firm and improve the firm, and that will come out of it.
Heath, what are you hearing? Same, maybe add to it, echo that?
I'm take a little different approach on the question, Damien. And, this is maybe going more, from a personal level and, individuals and what they've been going through, what they've accomplished. But I would challenge people as we move forward to what I've been calling a personal inventory of take a look at what you've been doing, on a weekly basis. What have you accomplished? What are your goals? Jeremy mentioned in the profession, many of the goals that people had or firms had are still the same. And I don't think that that's any different at the individual level. And so maybe a different way to look at that is think of it as like a sport or working out, over the past few months, or no telling exactly how long this will last, but what are you doing now to continue to improve? And then what are you doing to look 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road? If you continue to improve on those goals during this time, I think those are the people that will come out of this successful. And I think you'll be able to see a difference in, whether it is working out or it is in your professional career. People will see that and will reflect that. And one thing you mentioned was the new normal, and that's kind of a phrase that I haven't bought into as much, because if you look back at history and just life in general, things are always changing. You go through seasons of life, technology. There's always things that are changing, and I think the thing that's different now is some of this was forced change to where we had to do it. The pace of it has been much faster, but whenever we come out of this, I would more challenge people to, when they are doing that personal inventory, ask themselves the question of what can you do to make yourself stronger? What can you do to make your organization stronger? Because even when we do come out of this, things are going to be different. They're going to continue to change. So taking a little different approach on the question.
So with the background of what led us down the unexpected road that we find ourselves on now, along with some tips and areas to focus on both as a firm and an individual, what are some of the lessons that managing partners and firms have learned so far in responding to the pandemic?
That's a great question. We still continue to interact with so many firms, our clients across the profession, as you might imagine. And probably the first lesson that they learned is that how quickly they could adapt to change. I mean, I had so many managing partners tell me, "Guy, one of my concerns is that there's a lot of change coming." And as one said, "We suck at change." And I think a lot of them felt that way. And yet it was amazing to watch the firms across our profession adapt quickly to working remotely. In many cases, firms did that in a matter of 2 or 3 days. They were up and running. You look back on that and say, gosh, maybe you're a lot better at change than you thought. Here's what's interesting about that, though, I think, and they'll reflect on this later when they look back and say, okay, we used to think we're lousy at change. Look how fast we adapted to working remotely. When there wasn't a choice, then their people figuratively put their packs on their backs and started climbing the mountain. I think sometimes when you have to make change happen quickly and there is no choice, people did that incredibly well across our profession. So one of those, the benefits that are going to come from this, and I'm talking to so many leaders already about this, is the likelihood of reduced office space in the near future. I mean, as they look at that, what's happening is not only has working remotely worked for so many across our profession, what's been really interesting about it is they like it. So many like it. They find that they're productive. They're not getting interrupted. They're able to focus. They're also able to be at home and deal with some things they weren't able to deal with earlier. And of course, they got a lot to deal with schools being closed and those kinds of things. But they really like it. And so right now, firm after firm is starting to look and say and survey their people and find out their feelings. And with that, begin to do some planning already. And I had clients prior to the pandemic that were already looking at ways they might reduce their footprint by 30, 40% and still continue to grow. This is going to open the door to that. And when you look at the expenses that a firm has outside of their payroll expenses, which is always their largest expense, boy, their office space is a significant expense to firms. And so I see this being as a benefit. They're learning that lesson. They're learning that they can be their client's trusted advisor, that they don't need an invitation. And that's going to be a significant blessing that will come from this crisis, is the repositioning of not just a few, hopefully most of those who are at the manager, senior manager, partner level in firms will see themselves as trusted advisors going forward, rather than the trusted historians so many were prior to the pandemic. That is an incredible pendulum swing that we're seeing, and we're excited about, that will be a benefit that will come from this crisis. They're learning how resilient their people are, how willing they are to be really good team players and pitch in and do what's needed. They've learned the importance of their culture and how the importance of staying connected with their people. That's been significant of one of the things that they've learned. And I think they've learned how they can help their clients remotely. That wasn't even in their mind. I mean, in our profession, the mindset is if you're going to help a client, you see them face to face and you work with one client at a time. And the stories from the firms that have come out of how many webinars and virtual town hall meetings they've held that have been attended, each one by thousands of clients at one time, has opened the eyes of our profession and how we might actually help and serve clients in the future in some other way rather than face to face, one at a time, turn our meter on and serve them. So there's some great things that will come, and many more, I'm sure, but those are some of the early lessons that leaders across our profession are seeing, understanding, and recognizing as a benefit.
I'd be curious on your take on, because obviously some of these things that, again, talking about change in particular, right? I mean, it takes leadership. The things that work and the things that don't, or maybe the do's and the don'ts, if you will, of leadership. So what would you say along those lines? What are some do's? What are some don'ts that we could maybe offer at this time as we kind of look forward to, maybe optimistically, with things to come as a result of all this?
Well, I would say probably when I think of the do's and don'ts of leadership, probably one of the biggest ones that come to my mind is continue to invest in your people. I think one of the biggest mistakes, and we learn from the past, at least we ought to. I mean, I always laughingly remember a consultant who's long since retired from our profession, Bob Gallagher, and he used to talk about mistakes that we can make. And he said, there's a journal entry. When you make a mistake, you want to be able to debit experience and credit cash. He always laughingly talked about debiting experience and crediting cash. And he said, if you debit anything other than experience, and then you have to credit cash, you've made a huge mistake. We learn from the past. And when I look back on that financial challenge that we had, the Great Recession, if you will, in 2008, and for many firms, it was 2008, 9, and 10, those firms that hunkered down and stopped developing their people made the biggest mistake. And that mistake stayed with them for years. When we came out of that recession and they had not developed people, they had not recruited people, they had quit doing internships, they had not advanced people, they just went into survival mode, those firms clearly were light years behind their competitors that had continued to develop their people. So to me, that's a lesson that when I think of leadership do's and don'ts, that falls probably in my mind at the top of the list. The need to continue to focus on developing your people and how absolutely important that becomes in the midst of a crisis. And with that, I think of that. One, let's just talk about recruitment, and with recruitment internships, our encouragement to firms is don't stop recruiting people. This mindset that we've had that the only way to develop people is you sit down with them side by side and show them things, whatever, is really crazy. And now we've been forced, and I love that, we've been forced to figure out how we can train people remotely, how we can have interns remotely. We just started that with Upstream. One joined us yesterday, an intern, and it's largely remote training. And it can be done. And if you think about that, these young people coming out of school, they're the best prepared in the history of our profession to be trained remotely. And so that's one thing that firms need to make sure that leaders, that they don't do, is just close the door on recruitment, close the door on internships, because they're going to have these big gaps in skill level when we finally come out of this crisis, and the market's going to be booming when we come out of this crisis, and there's going to be such a need for people that are trained and understand the firm's systems and culture and how things work and so on. And that's what we're trying to train people in right now. So that's one big encouragement that we give to people, is don't stop the development of people. The other thing I look at is firms need to figure out how they intentionally develop their people. And with that, I think intentionally developing their best people. I think firms would benefit from looking at, if I could say it this way, look at some of the mistakes that they make and try to figure out how to avoid those mistakes. The biggest negative impact on developing anybody, and it's really important that leaders understand this and help other leaders in the firm, partners and senior managers and managers understand this. The greatest single barrier to someone's advancement is the time they spend working on things they already know how to do. That is so overlooked by so many leaders, they miss that by a mile. And so they look at an individual and say, oh yeah, they're one of our stars. They're one of our rock stars or superstars because they're so good at what they do and they're so productive. And if everyone's billable hours are X, this individual is X plus something, and they think they're going to be a great star. And they're not realizing that they are impeding that person's development. Every hour they spend working on something they already know how to do is becoming the biggest barrier to them advancing and learning and developing new skills and talents and confidence and ability. And firms miss that by a mile sometimes. We use engagements. In our profession, we use engagements to develop people. Every single engagement provides this incredible opportunity to help develop somebody. And every firm, regardless of size, has a limited number of engagements. Bigger firms have more, but they have more people they need to develop, and smaller firms have less engagement. And the real key thing is how many engagements are being used up with little or no training or development taking place. If I have somebody lead an engagement they've done before many times, they know exactly how to do it, they could do it in their sleep, I am using up that engagement with no development of skill, talent, ability, confidence, and so on. And firms sometimes miss that when they look at production and say, boy, things are great. We don't see any flaws. Everybody knows what they're doing. Production's really strong. They don't realize they have created an environment where no learning takes place. So we have to be very intentional, and that's one of the leadership do's in a crisis and any other time, is be intentional. It becomes more important in a crisis because there's this tendency to just stay afloat, make sure the work gets done and gets out, and we tend to not be as intentional as we should in how we develop people. Another big mistake I watch firms make is they allow their rock stars and superstars and future leaders to stay right in the middle of their comfort zones. You know, when you were in ELA, we talked a lot about comfort zones and how comfort zones are the biggest barrier to somebody's development. A comfort zone is doing what you already know how to do. And that is the single biggest barrier to what holds people back. And it's so important that again, they're pushing people and stretching them to do things they haven't done before and to feel the butterflies, as we used to call them in the ELA program, feel the butterflies so that's what learning and growth feels like. So those are some of the things that comes to mind that are some of the lessons that I think of, the do's and don'ts in the midst of any kind of a crisis, is to figure out how you're going to continue to develop your people in an intentional way. Probably the third section I'll just talk about quickly, and when I think of do's and don'ts, is when it comes to retention of people, where firms can make some really big mistakes is in the area of retaining their people. And really, in a sense, all great organizations are a reflection of the caliber of the people they get. If in our case, our profession, every firm's success is just a direct reflection of the caliber of team members that they have on, as Jim Collins would call it, their firm bus. And so to me, it's really important to make really good people decisions in the midst of a crisis. It's always wise to look and say, who should have never been on our firm bus? And this is a good time to have a bus stop for those people. You can do it in as kind of way as you want, but from a business standpoint, you ought to have a bus stop for those that never should have been on your firm bus to begin with. And every firm probably had some of those, a few perhaps, some more than others. But my worry is that you'll begin to have bus stops for people that dearly need to be on your firm bus, that you need them. They have the caliber that will help you grow and develop and keep clients and develop people and develop your reputations and all those kinds of things. It's vitally important that firms look beyond the current crisis and realize that incredible growth opportunities lie just beyond this present crisis. All leaders need to understand that if they choose to lose good people in the midst of this crisis, it's going to take them 18 months to 2 years to replace the caliber of those people, if in fact they can even find them then. And so firms need to make really wise decisions when it comes to really good people. You do whatever it takes to keep really good people, knowing the crisis will pass, the market will rebound, there'll be incredible opportunities. And if you've got somebody that has proven themselves with their caliber to be on your firm bus, then you do whatever it takes to keep them.
It's such great advice. And obviously, when in times of crisis or panic or whatnot, sometimes it's so important to be intentional. Like you said, I heard you use that word intentional, which is one I like to use a lot as well, to have a process and an approach and kind of look at the big picture. I guess a question I'd have for you is, and you were talking through about even your own experience with, a remote intern, making those investments in people, perhaps in an environment that's unlike or maybe slightly different or maybe even wholly different than those that we've had in the past. Any advice or suggestions on how to go about that and effectively make those investments?
Well, first of all, don't give up if it looks hard. That's probably the first advice I would give. People have their mindset on how things ought to work. And so for, say, somebody's trainers, or they're on that program where you bring on new employees and you train them, or you bring on interns and you train them, and they have a program and they're proud of their program. I'm not trying to knock it, please, Damien. I'm not trying to knock their program. But sometimes in their mind, that's the only way it works. So anything other than that looks hard, don't give up. Don't give up if it looks hard. Don't give up if it looks like a mountain. You got to climb the mountain. Commit yourself to climb the mountain. Don't think, well, we'll put off doing that now. The crisis will pass. We'll always go back to the way it's done. One of the wonderful things about a crisis is that it forces us to climb mountains we otherwise wouldn't climb. And there's wonderful views from those mountains if we'll climb them. So I look at the firms that have said, look, this is just the way it is. We're going to deal with it. We are going to develop an incredible training program that's remote. Those firms will benefit from developing those training programs long after the crisis passes. It will open doors to opportunities for them. So that's my first advice. Don't stop, and don't stop climbing if it looks steep or hard. Recognize those are where the opportunities lie. And this crisis has opened the door to some opportunities that we wouldn't have even thought of if we had not had it. It's not all bad. And so when firms really take that opportunity, They just need to connect, and they have the technology. I mean, the fact that they're working remotely as an entire firm shows they have the technology. Now they need to think differently about the kinds of projects they give, the discussions they have, the duration they're able to do it in. And that's all a learning process. We'll learn as we go. And rather than maybe wait until there's a standard, I would not recommend that. Learn as you go. Figure out what works for you, what works for the people that you have, the people you've hired. And it's kind of a feel your way through it process. But as I've talked to so many firms, they're feeling pretty good about their process and what they're learning. And again, I probably by my nature connect more to the best and of the best firms. That's always kind of, we call them the high performing firms. That's always kind of been our favorite go-to, is those firms that we put on the far right side of the bell curve. And they're finding tremendous success in training their people remotely, both interns and brand new full-time employees. So it's been a wonderful time of learning for them.
Any advice for, maybe flipping it around to those that are being led on getting those opportunities, particularly in an environment that is perhaps virtual, or, where you're maybe being evaluated a bit more on what you're doing and needing to get some help? What I mean by evaluating on what you're doing, obviously it's perhaps initially self-driven to an extent, but clearly also want to have those leaders that are helping with that. So any thoughts or ways maybe even leaders can help to encourage those that are looking to grow to be in the driver's seat of making those changes and continuing to grow?
You mentioned how much you like the word intentional and how often I've used it. It's probably, from a business perspective, my favorite word. So first of all, the leaders ought to be intentional and recognize it may be difficult, maybe impossible to be intentional with everyone. And I just caution leaders always from the get-go about that. That's why I've used that term, your rock stars and superstars. That can mean people at all different levels, but I always have believed that since there's such a limited amount of time, nobody can manufacture more time, that you have to be intentional with your best people at all levels. And so to me, that's the first caution I would give, is I'm not so sure that the advice I'm giving applies to everybody and everything. I think it falls apart when you try to do it that broadly. Look at your best people at each level of the firm or the organization. Be very intentional about what you're going to do to develop them. Have regular dialogue with them. Make sure that they have in front of them specific goals that will stretch them. Help them feel the butterflies, get them out of their comfort zones. Look for opportunities that stretch them to the next level. And probably most people need that, at least rock stars and superstars, about every 3 to 6 months. They need something that now stretches them to the next level, something that purposely makes them for a period of time feel the butterflies, feel a little anxiousness, have a little increased heart rate, not know exactly what they're doing, but they're learning. That's what learning feels like. And I think when leaders choose to be very intentional about developing people, and then if you're those people, if you're one of those rock stars or superstars, then you got to recognize all growth is going to come outside of your comfort zone. So feeling uncomfortable is a sign of growth. You ought to be committed to feel that way on a regular basis and be willing to take on those things that stretch you. You have to be accountable, especially in this day and age when we're working remotely. I mean, in a sense, nobody can watch you. So you've got to learn how to be very accountable, how to get things done, how to know how to ask quickly for questions when you need them and not consume and be a high resource consumer of someone's time or whatever, and how you can openly and honestly ask questions and learn and grow. This is an incredible time for people that want to advance in their career, but they have to recognize they need to be accountable, self-driven to do that. Somebody's not sitting right next to them. They need to light their own fire, be hungry, and move forward.
So maybe to that end, we've talked a lot about how some of these changes really are sort of teeing up future things that are changes that people were wanting to make, and maybe advancing those a bit and setting the stage for that. So I guess any words of encouragement or thoughts you would have, kind of closing thoughts to leave people with along those lines?
Well, I would point out from a leadership, since we focus mostly on leadership with this, I would point out that leadership in a time of crisis is going to leave a more lasting memory than anything else a leader does at any other time. And I don't say that to unnecessarily add additional weight to an already heavy burden that somebody might be feeling, but just as a reminder that lasting impressions are always made when leaders face challenging times. The crisis is going to pass. It will always. That was always a given. We'll get through this. We always have. We've always seen success come after a crisis. History articulates the resilience of mankind. Somebody said that the other day, and it's absolutely true. The key is to, again, be intentional. Crises can push us off of our intentionality because we get into a maintenance mode. We get into survival mode. We get into let's just get it done mode. I think firms, probably many leaders, felt that initially, and now they're realizing it's working. We're moving forward. Now they need to be very intentional. And again, it starts by I'll call it being selectively intentional, because like I said, you can't do everything for everyone. You really need to pay attention to whoever your rock stars are. Rock stars, in my mind, Damien, are those who are just solid performers. You can always count on them. They will always come through and perform consistently. And your superstars are those that blow you away. They just have a skill level at a different, higher level, an ability at a much higher level. Those two groups are where leaders need to be very intentional during a crisis, that they continue to develop those people. Those aren't the ones that ever demand their time. Those aren't the ones that drain resources. Those are generally pretty low maintenance people. You need to have a high touch with those otherwise low maintenance people during a crisis and keep developing them, because they will be your future leaders. And you don't want to miss the great opportunities that a crisis tees up for leadership development.
Very good words of encouragement and things to focus on when the human nature side of things kick in and makes it hard to think about being intentional and staying on track with that. So anything we haven't covered that you maybe want to add to the conversation at this point?
Well, we haven't talked much about the client side of things. I've talked more about the people side of things because that's probably where I first think. But interestingly enough, I've always seen great parallels between whatever we talk about on the people side of things and what we ought to be thinking about on the client side of things. So the same is true there. Leaders ought to be looking at their very best clients, be very intentional with your best clients, reach out to them, be proactive. We are in the midst of a crisis. Nothing says I care more than being proactive and reach out and just simply say, how are you doing? And I've been thinking about you, and tell me how things are going and let me know how I can help and whatever. I just think this is an incredible opportunity for those in our profession, especially, to really adopt that culture, if you will, of being trusted advisors without, waiting for an invitation. The crisis has delivered the invitation. So reaching out, being intentional with your best clients. And then I guess I would just give a caution. It isn't business as normal. Professional service firms and others can really be hurt in this environment if they're not having some discretion in terms of how they serve clients. There are those clients, from the ELA, we used to always talk about A, B, and C and D level clients, D being the worst. We should never serve D level clients even when the economy is good, because they probably don't intend to pay us. What's it like serving D level clients in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a crisis, and their ability to pay, because they are among the worst organizations there is cultural wise. And that leads to results and a reflective on their results that they'll have. So I've cautioned my clients to be wise in recognizing the clients they're serving and recognize they perhaps need to serve them differently to ensure that they get paid, and to be wise in where they spend their time. The opportunities to learn new services, to help clients in new ways, exists largely with your A and B level clients, those who value you the most, those who will pay for your services, not just value them, but pay for them, those who want to grow their business and have the greatest opportunity to do so. this is a great time for leaders to make sure that they're being wise and intentional, not only with their own people and their development, but also with their clients and their development as well.
I always feel like whenever I hear you speak or I talk to you, gain some sort of an insight or something to think about differently or whatnot. So thank you for that, and thank you for sharing the insights here on the podcast today.
Damien, thanks so much for having me. I always think the world of you. I appreciate what you're doing, and appreciate especially what you're doing to talk about these kinds of things in the midst of a crisis. Hopefully, it'll be helpful for others.
Let's now turn our focus forward to hear more from Jeremy and Heath on what leaders can do now to prepare to set themselves up for success in the future.
When it comes to leaders preparing for future success, I don't know that it's any different now than it was 5 months ago, 6 months ago, 3 years ago, for that matter. I think that as leaders, preparing for future success never really stops. They need to be evaluating, what is it that they need personally to grow as a leader? What are they doing to communicate more effectively? Right now, it's probably more frequently as one of the big changes. But they also need to be looking at what do they have scheduled intentionally to develop their areas of strength into even greater strengths. To me, that's the key for any leader that's preparing for future success, is taking a look and saying, okay, what are my strengths and how do I make those strengths even better? And if there are weaknesses, obviously, what do you want to mitigate? But committing to that development plan, that was pretty normal 6 months ago. Everybody was talking about, I've got these conferences, I've got these books I want to read, I've got these different things that I'm going to do. And as I think about what he said about the individual development, during this time of and what you could accomplish, it's the same for leaders. Is you've still got to have an intentional plan of, here's what I'm going to do to be more successful 6 months from now than I am today. And I would break it down into 3 or 4 month goals. That's something that I started a few years back, rather than saying, okay, these are my goals for the year. Here's what I want to accomplish in the next 3 months. It makes it much more intentional, much more deliberate. It's right there. You've kind of got to really get after it. And I think taking that intentional approach is really what's going to help leaders prepare for future success. And they've got to be thinking about that intentionally. Otherwise, it's not just going to happen.
I like the point you made about the fact that a lot of it really is the same to a certain extent. Have you had conversations, or are you hearing people maybe with some specifics around that as to how maybe they're taking the existing goals and either tweaking the implementation of them or the plans for them, or maybe they're the same?
From the firms that I've talked with, they're tweaking them a little bit. They're trying to adapt, right? Because especially with the extension of the tax deadline, that changed some things. A lot of that was going to happen in the summer has now kind of been moved a little bit, because there's still quite a bit of work to be done in the summer. So they're adapting them a little bit. A lot of things seem to be getting pushed out. I don't know. It almost seems that that's not the majority. While I've heard some firms that are saying that, a lot of others are still talking about, how do I keep developing? How do I keep connected with other leaders? How do I keep, informed as to what's going on? And you mentioned, it kind of takes a back burner a little bit when you're in crisis mode. And what happens is, it seems like even as leaders, it's really easy to fall back into quadrant one, right? To go back to Covey's quadrants. It seems like everything always goes back to Covey's quadrants, but it's so easy to get pulled into quadrant one. And right now, that's where so many leaders are. That's why things that are getting pushed off is because we're spending so much time in quadrant one. So I've talked to plenty of firms that, they're trying to focus that time on quadrant two, and they're taking that deliberate, intentional approach and saying, look, yes, there was an extension to the tax deadline. Yes, that changes the dynamic of the summer a little bit. But we can't just ignore developing people. We can't just ignore developing ourselves. We've got to help people spend time in quadrant two. And that's another thing that I think leaders are having to do as much as anything is, while there is a need to be in quadrant one a little bit in crisis mode, as we're coming out of that, to pull people back to quadrant two and say, don't forget to plan. Don't forget to prepare. Don't forget to schedule and set up the intentional development that you need for the year. it's easy to forget that because you're spending a lot of time in quadrant 1, which there's a need for from time to time in a crisis, but we've got to help people get back out of that. And I think that's what a lot of leaders are doing right now, is really helping their people get back to the planning mode, where a lot of that was kind of thrown out the window for a few weeks.
And I know, Heath, a lot of in your background and kind of focusing maybe on the people side too, is and Jeremy's talking about kind of this intentional development plan. In perspective, you would offer on that, and kind of, again, what leaders can be doing to really set up for success and look at how they can even be stronger going forward and more intentional, again, to use your word, Jeremy?
My comments are going to probably tie into, people development, and also even from a client perspective. And I think one of the things, not only our profession, but other organizations have concerns about is you just took a workforce, made them remote in a pretty short time frame, and you're not there in person. You're doing more of your meetings through Zoom or whatever it may be. And there's that concern of, are we going to start to erode our culture? Are we going to start to lose the culture that we've worked so hard to develop? And in some ways, in a time of crisis or uncertainty, is whenever you actually can build on that. So if you are, you have a plan of reaching out to your key people, you have a plan of reaching out to your key clients, they will remember this year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. They're going to remember how you operated. They're going to remember how you helped them through it. This shall pass and things will get better. They will draw back on those memories. And if you're doing the right things now with your key people and your leaders and trying to continue to develop them, in a lot of ways, I think we're going to have better retention of those key people of what we do in a time like this, not only from our people side, but from a client side. If we're able to help them through this and they come out and we help them with their future, we're going to have an opportunity here to retain clients, I think, in a much longer time frame. But on the flip side, if we're not reaching out and we don't have a plan to reach out to our key people or our key clients, you run the risk of losing them when things do turn around. And there's going to be some of that does happen. So I think you'll see things go two directions. One, you're either going to build a stronger people and a stronger culture and stronger clients, or you just sit and wait. It's going to go the other direction.
And I guess to that end, are there any maybe best practices in approaching that? Because I feel like there's a little bit of a maybe inherent challenge here. Again, when you're kind of in crisis mode, and you almost have like just a information overload, particularly with everything that's going on right now, with the developments and the relief and the what's happening, changing almost by the day. It seems like. Is there a way that you would suggest to approach that and demonstrate an understanding and being respectful of maybe the challenges that does pose to a client that someone's working with?
Yeah, probably two sides to that one too, Damien. From a people perspective, one of our biggest issues is if we have people spending the vast majority of their time doing the same things, they're not growing. And this could be an opportunity when you are having coaching discussions or working with people on what have you done different? What is on your horizon? What do you want to learn? What are you going to do differently? And having that be a focus, because it's easy to get sucked into the day-to-day right now. And you mentioned like the amount of information. Everybody is being hit with so much information, and it's easy to kind of waffle back and forth on what's accurate information, what should we do. If you can take that information and continue to grow in those areas, I think can be critical to our people. And from a client perspective, if we're not reaching out, someone else will. So prioritizing your clients of who you want to reach out to, how frequently. And yes, maybe you don't want to add to the noise, but if you're bringing value, you have to focus on the value that you're bringing them. And one saying that really has stuck out to me, it's not about what you do, but it's why you do it. And that's what people buy into. And if you're truly trying to help them, I think people will see that. And yes, maybe along the way, you do get one or two that do make the comment of, I've been hit with so much information. But if you're doing it in the right manner of trying to help them, I think most people will see that, and not only see it, but they'll remember that.
I think it's all about the approach right now, right? And seeing that as both being sensitive to the need, but if your intentions are in the right spot, I think it does kind of take care of itself. I don't know, Jeremy, on the on the front of, and I know that's something that we've talked about is, innovation and looking at what that means. Obviously, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And, are you seeing innovation playing a role in this and the forward looking and how firms can come out stronger, I guess, from the situation?
Yeah, we're seeing that some, and it's kind of showing itself in two different ways. The first would be looking for growth opportunities, and the current situation, thinking about growth seems a little bit odd, but a lot of firms are looking at what they currently have and recognizing that the current services are probably not going to generate the same revenue in the coming year that they were expecting. So they're looking for new service offerings, and that's one way that they're innovating. Is they're trying to figure out, okay, what can we offer our clients that, and for some would say probably that they should have offered in the past but weren't. But what can we offer them that we aren't already offering them? That's an important aspect of innovation, I think. And then the other side of that, where firms are starting to innovate some, is saying, okay, well, how can we improve what we're already doing? And that isn't the classic innovation, something brand new and shiny that nobody's ever seen before. I mean, that's that incremental innovation of, okay, here's a process that we have, or here's a service that we offer, and here's how we can improve it. Or maybe it's even within the firm, right? It's innovating as to, okay, how do our teams communicate? I've had a lot of communication with firms and a lot of questions from firms. It seems on, okay, how do we lead a remote workforce? And that's an area of innovation, really, in a way, is, okay, how do you now have the same communication? How do you have the same connection, the same level of engagement and culture in a firm that's distributed that you had when everybody was in the office together? And you take a small to mid-sized firm where maybe everybody was in an office together. That's a completely different thing for them. So, that's, in my view, where I'm seeing a lot of the innovation coming from firms, those two fronts: growth of new services and then ways to improve things that they're already doing, whether it's a service or otherwise. And I'm sure Heath probably has some thoughts on the innovation side from what he's seen as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. And one of the things that I like to talk a little bit about is just breaking down some of the the myths that are out there about innovation. And I think a lot of times people see innovation, they think invention instead of innovating, and they think it has to be something new, like an Uber or Netflix or something along those lines. But in all reality, anyone can innovate anytime. And there's times where I compare it to business development. Of you go up to someone and they would not see themselves as a business developer, or if you said go innovate, they don't see themselves as innovative. But in all reality, it's identifying problems, and there are new problems that have come out of this, and then working collaboratively to build a solution to help solve that problem. And that's where you're bringing value. And there's a couple different ways to look at this, and one is internal, and then when I say external, I'm more working with clients. We know it's important, but a lot of times there's not a process around innovation. And when I look at how we're going to grow, how we're going to exist in the future, and we talked about the pace of change and how rapid that is, it's going to be important to have a process around innovation. I compare it to HR, I compare it to marketing, I compare it to IT departments. It's a critical function of what organizations do, not just in the accounting profession, but potentially in other industries. And how we've been successful today may not always be the way that we're successful tomorrow. Jeremy mentioned the processes of working with team members. There are going to be new processes that come out of this, and I think we need to not only focus on firm leadership, but I think it's people with various backgrounds at various levels and taking that collaborative approach. And a lot of times, maybe they're the end users are the ones that are seeing the problems and having ideas on how to fix that. And then another very important part of this is we talk about the future of our clients and success of clients. We're going to have to help them be innovative as well. They're going through very similar things that our industry is going through. And if we can go in with the advisor mindset and asking questions instead of automatically trying to solve their problem, but trying to figure out what they're going through, what their clients are going through, and then helping them deliver a solution, we're going to build some long-lasting, happy clients if we're able to help them navigate those waters. So I just think, a lot of firms are going to have a bigger focus on this as we go forward. It's just with the pace that things are happening, frankly, I don't see how you can't have a focus on it.
It's so important too, right? And going back to the quadrants again, right, Jeremy, that, if you don't have a plan, you end up stuck in quadrant one and you're just putting out fires all day long. And instead of being able to kind of really get some momentum and intentional direction going here. So I know obviously a common threat to progress or moving forward or innovation or change, I guess, in general, is kind of reverting back to the old things that you used to do once the driver is gone. So maybe the crisis is over or the enthusiasm has waned a little bit. Maybe the way of saying is that, right, the going starts to get a little tough. So you kind of revert back. Any suggestions or tips on how to do that, or I guess avoid that and maintain momentum going forward?
Damien, that's such a tough one. It really is. I think the way you phrase that is perfect. It really does, to me, appear to be a danger to go back to normal. And I know, we've seen the phrase the new normal, and I don't know that there is a new normal. We're gonna just continue, right? Things are going to be changing on an ongoing basis anyway, and that's kind of the way the world was before, as things changed. I think the big risk for firms is they think that if they go back to the way things were, in January or February, that that was a better way, and that's really my fear, is that firms don't take the time to reflect on what they've accomplished and what they were able to accomplish, the resiliency of their people, the initiative of their people, how hardworking they were. That all of that kind of gets lost in this race back to the way things were before. It's not a secret. I'm not a huge fan of the way we've always done things. In fact, that's probably one of my least favorite phrases in business. Anytime I hear that phrase, I always encourage people to really examine, well, is that really the best way to do it, right? The way we've always done things. Is that actually what you should be doing? And right now, I know there's a longing for the way we used to always do things, because it kind of gives us that sense of comfort. This is where I would encourage people step outside the comfort zone a little bit again, right? I talked earlier about trying to pull people back in, but as we go back, don't get lulled into a sense of, well, it was easy before, so let's just go back to that. Look at truly what is the best way. I think my favorite quote on this topic, and I was reading a book right before actually all of this happened about, looking at obstacles as opportunities. And it was a quote from Rahm Emanuel, and it said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. Things that we had postponed for too long that were long-term are now immediate and must be dealt with. A crisis provides the opportunity for us to do things that you could not do before." And I absolutely love that quote, because there are so many things that firms accomplished and that they were able to do in the last few months that they didn't think they were able to do before. They were impossible, right? They were long-term, we'll never do it. Those are the things that we can't go back to the way they were before. Those are the things that we need to keep those benefits, recognize the benefits, and move the firm forward with that, and pull along that mindset of, we can do hard things. To me, that's a really exciting thing for firm leaders to be thinking about right now, is look at all the things that your firm was able to accomplish. Right? You think you were bad at change before. Look at everything that changed, that you did it well and how well it worked. Use that to make the other changes that need to be made, right? Let's not go back to normal. Let's figure out, okay, what else can we change while we're changing, and grow this firm forward.
And Jeremy, I think to add to that, kind of what you're describing is celebrate the success, and share those stories around, whether it's firms or clients, because people will resonate with those stories, and it'll take them back to the time to remind them of what you were going through and what success you did have. And Damien, one thing I would add to it is surround yourself with the people that want to change, or that have embraced it and seen it as a growth opportunity. If it's something that you try to force on people, typically in any kind of training or strategic plan or growth opportunity, if it's forced, a lot of times people have a hard time getting on the bus. But if it's more of surround yourself with those that want to be part of it, share those success stories, it kind of changes the mindset, and then people want to be part of it, and you see it kind of grow over time. And I do think it's pretty impressive what many, not only firms, but companies outside of public accounting have done. And we can't forget that. We need to celebrate the success and share that with others.
And so maybe that end, I know you're both very well-read individuals. Any recommendations of a book if you're going to pick one, and I'll give you the out and say let you include a few if you'd like, of a book or something to pick up and focus on to maybe help with that as we're forward looking here into the the year ahead in light of everything.
I'd say that's a great question. I'm looking at my bookshelf thinking, what if I could pick one? I'm going to pick two if that's okay, Damien.
That sounds good.
So the first one that I would recommend is called A More Beautiful Question. Warren Berger is the author. And that to me is a book that it really helps explain the importance of continually asking questions and focusing on asking more questions rather than just trying to get the first fast right answer. And I think that as we move forward, I don't know that there is a first fast right answer. But if we can continually be thinking about here are good questions to ask, get the right information. I know you said one, that'd be the one that I would go with. If I was allowed to pick another one or two, I'd say Persuadable. Al Pittampalli is a great one for leaders that are trying to figure out when's the right time to change their mind. Really enlightening about how it's okay to change and grow, and that's a positive thing. And then the other one that's more of a tool for leaders would be Illuminate by Nancy Duarte. And it really goes back to what you and Heath were saying earlier about the power of stories and how speeches and stories and symbols can be used to drive change and celebrate change and really become part of the toolkit of a great leader. So those would be, I know you asked for one, I'm gonna give you three. A More Beautiful Question by Warren Berger, Persuadable by Al Pittampalli, and then Illuminate by Nancy Duarte.
Great stuff. Yeah, no, I like it. The more the better right now. So I don't know, Heath, what would you add to that list?
Well, Damien, that was definitely a loaded question for Jeremy because since I've started working with him, I have about 30 new books to read. So that was definitely a tough question for him. I'll stick with two. There's a gentleman named John Gordon. It's very focused on positive leadership, the power of positive leadership. And he has a newsletter as well that I sign up for. It's something I've used throughout my career and shared with many of our team members. And actually just had a recent interview with Matthew McConaughey that I found very intriguing. Yeah, it was something that I'm definitely going to put to use. And then I'm going to take probably throw a curveball on my next one. It's a little different. It's more geared towards mindset, which I think our mindset right now is very critical as people are dealing. You never know what someone's going through. And some people may think that the pandemic is going to be over in a week or 10 days or whatever it may be. But, it's something that if we have the right mindset, we can use this in a time to show grit. It's a time for people to step up and show leadership. And so it's a book called Fearless. It's about a Navy SEAL, actually out of Arkansas, that went through some pretty rough times growing up and ended up in the SEAL teams and then ended up in SEAL Team 6. And it's very inspiring. It's kind of that never quit type attitude. And that's something that I continue to try to fall back on is, that mindset is just, it's critical right now.
Great suggestions, guys. I'm making notes over here as well because I feel like, and that's a true statement there, Heath, about Jeremy. You talk to him, and you're going to come out of a conversation with a list of books, maybe a few podcasts, a few things to watch. You're very well read and well versed guy, Jeremy.
I appreciate that. To me, reading is the key. You can get so much more information, so many different perspectives. It's really good at challenging your current perspective. And in times of change, I think having multiple perspectives to fall back on makes it a lot easier to weather a storm and move forward.
Couldn't agree with you more on that one. So I guess with that in mind, some perspectives maybe that we'd leave everybody with. So, kind of like the key takeaway, maybe a closing thought that you leave here. Maybe Heath, we'll start with you. What do you think?
I'll kind of tie back into an earlier comment that people are going to remember what you do, today and during this time. And that's not just the people you work with or your clients, that's also your family members. And just know that whatever you do as a leader today is going to have an impact on others. No matter who you talk to, your actions are going to impact others. I was kind of getting to it earlier as well, as far as, right now we're getting hit with a lot of information. and different perspectives. But I would just challenge people not to lose sight of a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, because on the back end there will be opportunity, and organizations that are taking that personal inventory now and taking a look at how they can grow, it will pay dividends in the future. And I don't want to make light at all of the situation, because there are organizations that need to focus on the day to day, but still you can't lose that long-term vision or mission of where you want to be. That's a dangerous spot to be in.
How about you, Jeremy? Closing thoughts that you'd leave us with here?
Yeah, I'd say kind of building on what Heath just said, that importance of taking the long-term view and keeping in mind that long-term view. Be intentional about how you're going to get there. There's a lot of uncertainty today. There's no question about that. But if we really reflect on the everyday outside of a crisis, there's a lot of uncertainty every day. We kind of don't see it as much because it's not as prevalent. It's not as in our face. It's not as obvious. But there's always a level of uncertainty. So as you look at that long-term view, be very intentional as to how you're going to get to where you want to be. Break that down into shorter term windows, 3 to 4 months. Yes, there's uncertainty, but in 3 to 4 months, you've got a little bit more control around that. And then you adjust and you update, and it's incremental as you grow. It's a long-term plan. It's a long-term vision, but it's incremental growth. And you do that very intentionally. And even in times of great uncertainty like now, it can give you the opportunity to be more successful because you have the opportunity to pivot where you need to. But it still all comes back to being intentional at the end of the day.
Great stuff, guys. Really great stuff. Anything else that you'd kind of add that we didn't, that we haven't discussed on the topic of kind of just this general forward looking and way firms can continue to kind of grow and maybe even get stronger in the current environment to the extent they can?
Damien, I feel like we've covered it pretty well. Obviously, we can't cover everything, and there's not I wish there was just a blueprint that we could just give every single firm and say, here's how you're going to get stronger. Here's how you're going to come through this situation and be great as a result of it. I think it comes back to that encouragement of the industry and the profession has come through a lot of difficult times before. They aren't the exact same. It's not the same difficulty, but there have been difficult times in the past. We've weathered those storms. I'm convinced as a profession, we're going to weather these storms, staying focused on the opportunities that are out there and not dwelling on the obstacles. There's always obstacles, but how can we stay as focused on the opportunities as possible? I think is a really important aspect of it.
Well said, Jeremy. So I just want to thank you guys for taking the time during this busy time to share your thoughts. And we'll put your contact information in the show notes here so people can reach back out to you. But I really do appreciate it, guys.
Appreciate it, Damien. Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you, Damien. Enjoyed it.
I'd like to once again invite you to learn more about and reach out to Sam, Jeremy, and Heath with the contact information we've included for them, along with the links to the book recommendations that Jeremy and Heath gave us in the show notes of this episode, available at bkd.com/simplytax. We would really appreciate it if you would help others find and determine if the Simply Tax podcast is something they would enjoy, and leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I would also really enjoy connecting with you on social media. You can find me out on Twitter, where I tweet about tax at Damian Martin CPA, on Instagram, where I post about my life at the intersection of tax and being a dad at Tax Dad, on YouTube by subscribing to our Simply Tax YouTube channel, and out on LinkedIn.
I'm Damian Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.